Hello and welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bush. Old Bush, how is the post-Wimbledon hangover going for you?
It's been weird, hasn't it, to not have tennis on every waking hour of the day. How it works on the West Coast is I wake up around a steady 7:15 in the morning, immediately turn the television on and have, 6 straight hours of tennis. It's weird to not have that, and I suspect my partner is happy about that.
Probably, right? And also, you could have a lot of tennis on if you wanted to. If you were a true sicko and wanted to watch clay court tennis again for some reason after Wimbledon just ended. Boy, do I have some tennis for you, sir.
Remember that segment on Parting Shots a few weeks ago where I was like, there is 3 different surfaces being played within the month of July? It's already happening,
it's obscene.
Folks.
It's upsetting. Newport might be the most offensive because we have a grass tournament after Wimbledon. I get why this is happening at the Tennis Hall of Fame. But also, guys, relax. I saw John Isner playing this week. I had to shut it off. It was too much.
Is there something that we can do here where after a Grand Slam has played, you can't play on that surface again? So we kind of like block it into a single season. I kind of think that would be quite fun to try and do. I wonder how it would work.
What is the grass court situation in Vancouver public-wise? Is there anything publicly available?
Nothing public. No, there's a private club where I think there's 2 grass courts. So imagine if you're like an up-and-coming player.
Well, nobody is it's really weird. It's really, it doesn't feel like it's great to upkeep either, right? It's like I kind of get why it doesn't exist to the level it should. So it's really all about Wimbledon just being the most elitist place possible in the history of mankind.
I think I came away from Wimbledon with the sense of just like, I think this might be the first time I've actually had this thought in my adult life of just being like, fuck that. I like grass court tennis. I just am not a huge Wimbledon fan, I've got to say.
Well, that's a good segue into how we're going to treat this kind of special open era post Wimbledon edition version of the show. And it's to look back at Wimbledon and kind of unpack our final thoughts on what we saw, because I will admit, Bush, that Alcaraz Djokovic final kind of brought me back to a place where, because it ended the way it did, I had rosy feelings about this tournament. And it kind of masked how I probably would have truly felt if Novak had won. And it led me down a spiral of my fandom and what it really means. But the Alcaraz win, the way it went down, the stakes, the fact that this win was desperately needed, I think, for some people. I think the fact that the win broke through the tennis mainstream and you had people who weren't tennis fans talking about it. It checked all those boxes for me that on the Monday afterwards, I was like, yeah, you know what? That was great.
It's still astonishing, is it not? I think this is kind of the way that I felt following the US Open win, which rocketed the Spaniard up to world number 1, is that I was left a few days later just feeling like, wait, that actually happened? That's the thing that we talked about, that we prognosticated about and all thought and dreamt might happen, actually just happened. I think the same is true here as well, which is that even in our prediction show, I don't think any of us thought really that this was like a highly likely outcome. And then to be a few days removed from it, it doesn't seem any less remarkable, honestly, because he firmly affixed himself at the top of the world rankings and saw off potentially the greatest all-court tennis player of all time in the process. And I think also just to touch on that as well is that we've got so used to players coming up and falling to Novak Djokovic, and it's just not happened here. And I think that's something that's really worth celebrating and reveling in, at least for a few more days.
Yeah, the Djokovic stats that were rightfully praised and honored before this match, I think, are even more astonishing now after watching that match, and the fact that he had gone unbeaten for so long, the fact that it really did feel like he was somewhat invincible on that court for Alcaraz to break through. Still required a pinch me moment on that Monday. Speaking of pinch me moments, I don't know if you saw this, Bush, but Alcaraz quoted as saying that his dream is to play doubles with Rafa at the Paris Olympics. How great would that be? And could you see that happening?
That'd be absolutely wild. I'd love it so much. They're not favorites, surely.
No, and I also feel like they should fix that tournament. Let's be honest here. It's tennis. It's the Olympics. Let's get a good old fix going on for the most drama.
Oh, you mean like an actual fix, right? So in the sense of the fix is in levels of just rig it straight up. I mean, it's the IOC, everyone. It's all rigged. Allegedly,
I'm just putting it out there. Yeah, I'm just putting it out there reportedly. But I know that would be absolutely amazing. And Alcaraz in the conversation. I know I saw a lot of the post-final conversation about like how many titles will he win, or like is he an outlier? Is there anyone amongst his group of peers that's going to join him in terms of winning these big titles? But it feels kind of stupid to prognosticate how many Grand Slams Carlos Alcaraz is going to win because he's 20 years old and it's 2023. But stupidity aside, Simon, I ask,
how many Grand Slams is he going to win?
He could get 20, right? He could get 20.
Are we literally 1 week removed from me saying, can we have someone win one first? Let's get over the hump. I guess technically he's a multi-time champion now. I think it is hard to imagine a situation where he doesn't win at least another Grand Slam. He's just given everything that we know. World number one.
Huge.
20 years
He'll
of
win
age.
one more. He'll win one more slams.
I don't know. Yeah, okay. It's ridiculous. But at the same time, this is also the same thing that we were saying about Naomi Osaka, remember? Like in terms of where her career arc was at and the expectation of she was easily the best hardcourt player in the world, and you couldn't have seen a situation. You would have been laughed at. You would have been called a fool, right? The idea that she wouldn't win multiple times more on a hardcourt. I mean, she got to 4, so it's not like she had a bad career at all, and we haven't yet seen the second half of what she's going to do.
Might come back. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, who knows? But I think you'd be very naive if you didn't believe that Carlos Alcaraz has at least a couple more in him. That has to be the case, surely.
Yeah, and I think you brought me back down to earth very quickly and rightfully. So I thank you for that, because who the hell knows what's going to happen in the future? And this sport in general is very cruel. Injuries happen out of nowhere. 2 is nice though. 2 is great, and I did like the fact that it settled number 1 in the most true of ways, because the best player on the tour is Carlos Alcaraz. Though through 3 slams so far, Novak Djokovic still has 2. The calendar slam is dead, but I am finding the discourse around Novak fascinating as always. And I'm not talking about the racket slam, but I think Luke mentioned this on the Discord about Novak, maybe the loser being somehow more intriguing or maybe more captivating in different ways. I'm back. I'm kind of buying what he's selling here, Bush. And I maybe it is seeing Djokovic like for once in recent memory, having to put on the loser speech and being so humble and gracious about it. You're reminded, I guess, of maybe that side of him, but am I being Joko-pilled? Am I letting him off the hook now by saying he's a lovable loser?
It depends whether or not you fully go tinfoil hat, and in his loser speech or runners-up speech, he had to get the Roger dig in there, didn't he?
He did. He really did, didn't he? I love that, though. That was perfect.
He could have picked anyone. Could have picked anyone.
I could have picked any moment. But he's right, and we were all thinking it. You know what? That's what heel Joker does, though. He just says what everyone's thinking.
We were all thinking it in the moment.
He's the Andrew Dice Clay. He's the Andrew Dice Clay of tennis. That's my most dated reference possible.
I don't quite buy the hunter. It's a bit like all of the LeBron James like washed king mentality of being like, dude, you're still the best player in the world. Like, shut up. Like, no one's saying that. As long as we don't get this ridiculous narrative, or like, as long as I don't get Novak Djokovic on Instagram being like, everyone was saying that I couldn't do it, and I came back and I conquered. Like, literally no one is saying that. You are the overwhelming favorite at the Australian Open to win again, and you're in the top 3 favorites to win at the US Open. No one's remotely saying that you are not going to be contending for major titles for the next few years still.
I will say the hater in me enjoyed how quickly that let's eat narrative died. Remember how he was talking about how they're all hungry, and then he's like, I'm hungry too, and let's have a feast. I'm glad we never have to speak of that quote again, Simon.
Yeah, some PR company's going to need to roll that one back, aren't they?
I think that was a big throw, right? That was they're like, all right, guys, the decks have been made. Djokovic's team is signed off. We're going with the feast line at the next press conference.
90 pages long in Google Slides. Speaker notes at the bottom.
I do love the hyperbole as well in these speeches. So like Novak's like, oh, Alcaraz is great, blah, blah, blah. But he's like, yeah, he's got the best of myself, Rafa and Roger. I'm like, okay, well, is that true? Are you willing to say that, Bush? Because I know you have been on the ground floor of this. You were watching him as a wee, I don't know, 14-year-old. I don't know when you first spotted him in the junior ranks.
Yeah, I think the idea that he is like wee Nadal, which I think for a while was the thing that was being circled around him, right? Like he's Rafa 2.0. I mean, he just isn't. That's objectively not true at all. Like the idea of saying that he's an amalgamation of all three.
Right.
I think it's a bit of a. I mean, it makes sense. I don't think it's a little bit of a stretch, because I think he's such a. If that was the case, then why would someone like Holger Rune look exactly the same as him on a tennis court, right? Like,
right. And now maybe it's more a product of he just watched these guys all the time.
Absolutely.
Like these are who these guys watched. That's it. That they watch hours and hours and hours of these guys play, and they absorb parts of their game. I think that makes a lot of sense, really. So it is, I guess, when you hear when it comes from someone like Novak, maybe it sounds like it's a bold statement, but then when you sit back slightly, you're like, oh, wait a minute. These people like to play tennis. They also like to consume tennis. So it checks out.
Also, there's a lot to be said about the idea of what a modern day tennis player looks like in terms of analytics and in terms of how to win points and how kids are being trained. And I think this is one of the things that I've appreciated more in my 30s and started to analyze sport from, which is through the lens of what are you training? Like when you're away from the views of the spectators and away from the gaze of everyone, what are you doing off of the court? Because what you're doing there and what you're training automatically will translate to what's happening on the court, and how do you improve your weaknesses? And I think that's kind of really an interesting evaluation of Carlos Alcaraz, is that he's basically trained the things that have been in vogue for the last 5 years. So it's not really a surprise that he looks the way that he does, is because he's basically tried to eliminate or flatten all of the weaknesses that players have tried to pick on. And he doesn't really have any. How many weaknesses can you say that he does? I think he has nothing.
He's not from that YouTube generation in the sense that he learned from watching YouTube, though, because I think we need that in tennis to truly get to the Dan Evans world of equality, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's also a level of, I don't want to call it blandness, because I think that's really unfair. I don't think anyone could say that Carlos Alcaraz is boring or Holger Rune is boring to watch. But I think there is a level of sameness, which...
Yeah, assembly factory-esque almost, which does sound unkind and also not fair, really. But I understand what you're saying.
Because the same thing is true in football, right? Like everyone plays kind of the same with positional play. Everyone plays kind of the same in the NBA in terms of spacing and three-pointers. Like when you sort of do start flattening out the edges and getting rid of all of those different elements, it can get a little stale. And I think those are we haven't quite got there yet in tennis. I think there's just too much variety and it's just too global as a sport. But I think if you look at it, Carlos Alcaraz is the first example of really growing up in an analytics-led era where this kid is not allowed to have any weaknesses at all. Like you play this way, you make sure he's an all-court player on every single facet of it. And you just don't get worn out. The
other winner at Wimbledon, Markéta Vondroušová, got a strawberry tattoo, Bush, or she's getting a strawberry tattoo to commemorate her shocking win to 24-year-old, rising 32 places to 10th in the new rankings that came out last Monday. The first unseeded player to win the women's singles title, and someone that I think we talked about enough, Simon. We got some praise, in fact, from our wonderful listeners because we did mention how she was able to take that final rather than Ons losing it. But for the most part, the discourse surrounding that final was about Ons losing, and it's because Ons Jabeur is quite a wonderful figure in the sport. One of the best we have. One of the few people I think Breakpoint was able to bring to a wider audience of sports fans for the better. So I understand why people were a bit devastated. But do you agree that in the aftermath, it's a bit of a downplayed win again for the second year in a row?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's very true, given the lack of fanfare around Rybakina. And there's multiple factors and multiple reasons, I think, for that. The case being last year, not just, first-time champion,
the whole ban. We're going to ban those people.
It being an exhibition, all this other stuff. And I think also her from a personality standpoint of not exactly being the most well-known player or being the most outspoken or like her personality not given a chance to shine. I think that's also potentially the case with Markéta Vondroušová as well. And, Ons Jabeur is a big personality is an adjective as opposed to her being outspoken and boisterous and all that sort of stuff. She's just well known, and I think she's well supported. And I think there's a reason that people gravitate towards that narrative of her losing rather than Vondroušová winning. I think it's actually, if you look in hindsight and take a step back from everything, it's actually a much closer matchup. And if this was played in the semifinals in Doha, you could almost say that it's, much more of a 60-40 matchup in Jabeur's favor as opposed to what I think most people were thinking, which was this was going to be a demolition job. I mean, it clearly didn't turn out to be the case.
Yeah, and I guess, Josh said it in the Discord, Vondroušová has a good record against Ons, and it's a bit of a toss-up a couple of days before the final. It felt like a bad matchup. It felt like also after the semifinal, it was almost meant to be in a way that it always isn't when it comes to sports, because I know we love to get punked when it comes to stuff like that and being like, well, this time it'll be different. This time everything is going to work out. It is nice to see, though. There's a truly wonderful story on the other side of this. Someone who has battled injuries, someone who has battled being on the outskirts of the game through no wanting of their own, just because their body wasn't able to hold up. And now being in a position now where you are back on the biggest stage, and now with a ranking that gets you guaranteed access into the biggest tournaments. I think that's a hell of a cool story as well.
Absolutely, Dev. Absolutely. Not going to hear anything different from me.
Okay, well, we'll leave the Wimbledon reacts there. And when we come back after the break, we'll get to parting shots, some news and notes, including the exploits of one Leo Borg, Bjorn Borg's son, making waves. Wow, we're old as hell. All right, more Open Era coming up after the break. Hello and welcome back to the Open Era podcast. It's time for parting shots. Alexander Zverev back in the news this Wednesday. He's facing a second allegation of assault by another former partner, this time Brenda Petea, who is also the mother of their daughter. I'm not going to pretend I know German law super well, Bush. I will, though, kind of relay what I've been reading and what I've been seeing on various tennis message boards, including our Discord. But basically, Zverev has the opportunity now to either pay a fine or take this case to court. But the fact that it's got to this case, or this level, indicates that the public prosecutor indicates there is sufficient evidence of bodily harm in this matter, Simon. So it's like a 500,000 euro fine, it seems, but I think there's a lot left to play out here. In any case, this was confirmed by Brenda Petea's people and representation, Simon. So obviously extremely troubling news. On January 31st this year, remember, Zverev declared that, quote, justice has prevailed when the ATP closed their investigation into domestic abuse claims by his ex-girlfriend, Olya Sharapova. So there's that.
I think it is worth pointing out just at the top of this segment that he wasn't really cleared, was he? There was just insufficient evidence,
right.
Which is not the same thing at all. Yeah, this is just a very upsetting story, is it not? That regardless of everything around this, the separate story with Olga Sharapova is that these things continue to follow Alexander Zverev around. It's just, I wish there were better men inside of the top 100, and I think in general, Dev, because it's kind of sad and it's shitty just to sit here and have to talk about another one of these stories in the sport that we cover. I don't think I have anything to add other than just like, I hope that this young lady is okay and is that this process goes along and she is not put through the ringer in the way that so many other young women are.
Right. And I think her team wanted to make it clear that this was not about the financial aspect, which I think is distressing in itself. I mean,
it never is.
Understand why.
Yeah.
Right. No, and we understand why they're saying that, because that's the first retort from the dipshits out there. With the Zverev stance. If there's still people like that out there, which I think there are, and it's extremely upsetting that there is an actual Zverev hive still remaining. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty more to play out, but I'd be fascinated to hear from perhaps some other people involved in tennis about this, including the people who led that investigation in January, to see what happens now. Because like I said, I am not a German law expert, but from the sounds of it, it makes it clear that it seems that the Berlin prosecutors are seeking this penalty order for a reason. So there we are. I mean,
these things don't come out of nowhere, do they, Dev?
Yeah. And I mean, this is on the same week as Benjamin Mendy signing in France to continue his career, and a bunch of footballers voicing their support for him as well, and voicing their support for Mason Greenwood. But I would be fascinated to hear from some of his peers, because I think we know how, I know the likes of Daniil Medvedev and his partner feel, but a lot of people have sided on Team Zverev, so to speak. So let's see what happens next. All right, Simon, moving on. I don't know if you saw this Zhang Shuai incident in Budapest.
Please inform me, Devang. I did not see this.
So in a match with Markéta Toth, who is Hungarian, so her home tournament at the Hungarian Grand Prix Clash, a massive argument with umpire Morgane Lara developed after a line call. They're on clay. Once again, I'm telling you, for some reason, they're on clay. So there was a call. There was a ball mark in dispute. It was quite clear that the call was in Zhang's favor, but the chair umpire basically didn't want to get up and help her at all. And basically the supervisor's like, well, it's the umpire's job, so like I can't do anything. But Zhang, who had been open about some of her mental health struggles recently, I think she lost her grandparents, and she was remarking about how long she's played tennis for. And I think it's like 29 out of her 34 years on this earth. She's like, I'm tired. I just want to go home to China. So it wasn't surprising to see this kind of get to her in the way it did, because she retired from the match. I think she was the second seed in this whole tournament. But the reaction from Markéta Toth is one of celebration. She raises her hands in the air, and the crowd is cheering. And it's easily one of the shittiest things I've seen on a tennis court. This is one of those instances, though, where, as it's been widely remarked, Zhang Shuai is widely beloved on the tour. So the entire tennis posse circled together to voice support for her, including your Azarenkas, your Jabours, your Sacharies. I saw Denis Shapovalov also commenting on this, on how outrageous it was. But yeah, first of all, we shouldn't be on clay anymore. But also, what a horrendous look for this tournament as well, because this player is from Hungary and it directly led to her win. Did Viktor Orban order this down? Was this an Orban special? What happened here?
Known as the Orban special, as you outlined.
Yeah, it's part of the playbook. Apparently, it's fixing first round matches at your Grand Prix.
Tell you what, I've said this on record previously, and I'll say it again. I'm just so thankful when Hawkeye and automatic line calling is not at these events. You know, I love it so much. Can we just fucking hurry up?
What a twist, eh?
This?
What a twist. I could swear I've been on this podcast being like, isn't it nice we have real people making real calls? Like, isn't that the way we always wanted to watch the game? What an idiot I was, sir. Wow.
Yeah. I feel like it's one of those things that as soon as you actually see it take place and you realize that watching a bunch of man babies and spoil Nepo babies on both the men's and the women's side berate a line judge or a bull kid over the most, utter shit.
It's all bad. Yeah. Do you think a cyborg will put up with that, by the way? Do you think a cyborg will put up with a 19-year-old freckled-faced kid giving him guff for a foot fault?
What I want to see is the next evolution of Hawkeye and the automatic line judges. The moment that a player starts complaining about a line call, is this they get a spray bottle in the same way that you would give a cat or a dog when they did something naughty?
Yes.
So they get sprayed with water immediately.
This incident was terrible. The It did remind me though of like I don't know if this is the correct way to describe this, but it does feel like voyeurism sometimes for these smaller tournaments where like when you're watching it on the stream, it feels like the camera's poking in through like the side of the cage in the corner and like someone is just filming on a Sony handheld. That's how it felt watching the highlights of this. But there's something that's nice about that. To go along with there should be human umpires. Give me the shittiest camera angles you could possibly find.
It's the moment that you have like a slightly different camera angle than the one that you're used to.
You're like, what is going on here? Like, where is this? Where's the ball coming from?
Or you only get like the one camera view, so you don't get a change of camera shot.
Right.
It's just like the one permanent fixed shot.
It's the good stuff.
Not the nicest.
All right, moving on. I mentioned there was 80 tournaments happening this week. One of them included Leo Borg.
First tour win, I believe, for the 20-year-old son of Bjorn Borg, former world number 1, 11-time Slam champion winner, Bjorn Borg, greatest player of all time. Let's just move quickly over that.
Wow. I nearly forgot about that nuclear take. Continue.
So a couple of things to say about this. It's just kind of, I mean, it's not really a story, right? It's just a 20-year-old junior player. If it was someone of any other name, then it would not matter, just given the first round of tournament in Bastard. But that being said, great outfit from Leo Borg, wearing all feeler. I love the color of these shorts, and he has a very good-looking serve. He really does. It looks very aesthetically pleasing. I don't think this kid is going to be a very good player. I don't think he's going to be a top 50 player. But at the same time, it was a cool story nonetheless.
Definitely, and I will say it's cool that it's at the Swedish Open and he was a wild card and didn't squander his wild card opportunity. I think he lost to Korea in the next round, but to get that match win, I can only imagine what it's like being the son of a legend like Bjorn Borg. And also, it does feel like Bjorn Borg's son should be older. I don't know why I'm saying that. He's 67. I'm just like, wow, his son's that young. Like Bjorn Borg, cool. But threw me off a bit to realize that he's just 20 years old and kind of getting going with his career. But yeah, I mean, in some ways, like you kind of like Michael Jordan's kid, like they almost nothing expected of you because it's like, well, or are you like LeBron James's kid where it's like, well, you've shown some ability. So Bronny, we're going to turn the hype machine up to 1 million. I think he's on more of the Michael Jordan side, but there's not really huge expectations for Leo Borg to like win stuff. But I mean, that's not always the goal.
47 is the new 30 for having children. That's what
I know. Speaking of Vladimir, his brother has been banned for 18 months. I wanted to bring this up, Bush, because I was listening to Daniil Medvedev talk about missing drug tests and like how this works for tennis players. So Michael Ymer says that the ITF charged me with a potential anti-doping rule violation for having 3 missed out of competition test attempts in a 12-month period. I fought that charge at a hearing and was cleared by an independent tribunal of 3 arbitrators in June of 2022. The ITF wasn't happy with that and basically went back at him on this. The post goes on. The Court of Arbitration for Sports got involved, which is never a good thing. The big thing to take away here is that he never tested positive for using anything. It's the idea that he's missed these tests. And Medvedev was talking about how it's not an impossible thing to miss these tests. It's not always malicious, because you've got a lot going on. Your schedule's insane. Feels innocuous enough, but first thing I also remembered was Simona Halep, but Simon. Mm-hmm. Is this different? This feels different, right? This isn't the same. Or now are we getting too in the weeds?
I think this is different. There's no positive test for starting points. A very strong pushback from Ymer as well, right? And I know we got that from Halep as well, but seemed furious, I think is the way that I would describe the way that Mikael Ymer was defending him. And rightfully so as well, right? Like I feel like if you were in that position, you really were innocent, then or you feel like you had good reasoning to miss these tests. I think this is going to be an interesting one to follow, just to see how this one sort of plays out. Mostly because we have said, or I have said, I guess I shouldn't implicate you in this one as well. Which
please,
Open Era has said, the podcast of Open Era. No, I think I have said previously that I think people would be naive to believe that there is not drug taking and performance enhancing drugs taking within the sport of tennis. I think that's still accurate. And I think there's just easy ways to try and get around those situations. So I find these ones very, very difficult to know where to stand on it, simply because like I personally believe that there is a ton of this stuff happening, and it would not surprise me if Mikael Ymer was either doping or taking enhancing substances. But at the same time, given how sort of shitty some of these rules are and the way that it's sort of blocked out and the way that sort of Daniil Medvedev was talking about it, it wouldn't shock me as well as if that he was completely innocent in terms of the way that the structure's bullshit as well. So I think that's the part that I will be curious to see how this one plays out.
Yeah, I agree. And Jensen Brooksby, of course, is in the same boat as Ymer. And I think it's interesting. Brooksby accepted his ban, but basically it was like, this is the best thing we can do right now, even though he didn't technically test positive, and his lawyer is the same lawyer that's representing Simona Halep. So I think it's very interesting to see what Howard Jacobs will use as a defense. I think for Brooksby, he was saying the idea of asking these people to provide their whereabouts so far in advance is pretty ridiculous considering their schedule and what is required of them for their profession, which is a pretty fair argument and kind of backs up what Medvedev was saying. But yeah, Brooksby on the shelf, Ymer on the shelf for now. Not the end of the story by any stretch of the imagination. Bush, do you got anything else before we wrap up?
Not really. I don't think so. I think I'm still basking in the light of Carlos Alcaraz winning his second Grand Slam. So it'll be nice to...
Yeah.
We'll see how the hardcore season goes.
Whenever
it's going to be
starts.
fascinating. Incoming Danny Medvedev winning every hard title and then losing round one at the US Open.
How about 2 challengers remaining? Got anything for us there?
Okay, my 2 challenges remaining, or 2 challenge remaining, however you want to say
challenge.
it is.
Singular, please.
Just a single challenge, yeah. So a single challenge, but a double bill of whether I'm going to do Oppenheimer and Barbie back to back. Have my tickets booked for it. Apparently both very good. That being said, I've got to say, Tenet was shit, and Christopher Nolan is on thin ice at the moment, because I've not really enjoyed his last 2 films. Yes. Didn't really like Dunkirk and didn't really like Tenet. So I'm into this a little apprehensive, I've got to say.
It's fair. I mean, there were parts of Tenet I liked. I really am not vibing with John David Washington as an actor. And I feel like that was my major problem with that movie as well.
That's the thing that you took issue.
Just in general, I'm not in. I think it's just, I'm not in at all. And I've heard from others that Nolan is on thin ice, but I'm also going to see Barbie. That was probably going to be mine. Mine in general was going to be the movie going experience. And I know there's a big strike going on, and this is not equivalent to crossing picket lines, but it's also a reminder to appreciate and enjoy the work that goes into creating these massive works of art and how many people are involved and how things really get made. So
should we be going to these films? I'm not sure.
I was thinking about that as I was saying that. I'm like, wait a minute, is this crossing the picket line? I don't know. I don't know what happens now.
I'm confused.
Let's leave it there. All right. Reminder, we are on patreon.com/open era. Join us there, get the show ad free, plus get it early on Sundays. You also get access to our Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time with our wonderful friends in there. It's a great time. Plenty to talk about as we get into the North American swing. We're also on Twitter for however long that medium lasts @OpenEraPod. And if you want to be so kind, give us a rating and a review. That would be great. We love reading them. We'll read it on the show too and give you a shout out. So please do that. And I think that's it for producer Dylan on the 1s and 2s, and for Simon. Thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.